Welcome to my ninth and hopefully final video in the first main lesson of making our action RPG in Unity. And this video's focus is on getting the scene transitions to work. I've already finished a cave, I've finished an east overworld, and I've finished a south overworld. And I want to link all of these stages together using different scene transitions. And so this is kind of a big step. This video is very code heavy, not a lot of Unity editing, just a little bit. And we're going to learn two really cool new things. Those are scriptable objects, which is a way for us to retain data between scenes. And then also looking at enums or enumerators, which is a data type that it's kind of like an integer, but you're allowed to use words, which is good for some things. So let's get started. So let's, I guess, kick it off with making the script for the scene transition. So let's start with, and I want to say that's going to be a core script. C# script. One word, scene transition. And then we're going to double click it to get it to open, and we will have it in Visual Studio. So the scene transition is going to be the thing that's going to be attached to an invisible object that detects if the player walks off the edge of the screen or into a cave. And so this thing actually doesn't need a start or an update. We're only going to activate off of a trigger being entered. So let's start with the first variable. And this is a string. And it's called scene to load. And then we'll put a tooltip here. I guess we can specify that as, well, actually, technically all these are required, but. So this is the name of the scene to load without quotes. The next one, this one's a lot trickier, but this is going to be the player destination position. And this is going to basically be where on the other map the player is spawned at. Now, we're going to have to calculate some other things. If you walk off the edge, we're going to have to calculate if you're like 2 steps to the left going south, then you're going to have to appear 2 steps to the left on the new screen on the south. So the tooltip here is going to say that if you're exiting with the point, you need to set X and Y. If you're going to be, I don't know if I can get away with \n, let's see if we can. If you're going to exit east or west, if you're exiting east or west, you're going to need to specify set X to 0, Y to the Y that we want on the other scene. And then if you're exiting north and south, we would set the Y to 0, and then we set X to where we want to come out on the other scene. Now let's hope that shows up. I hope those \n's work. If not, we can play around with that. Next up is going to be an offset, which is a float. And an offset is just how far we're going to push in the player from the edge. So like an extra, so that they're not like super close to the edge. How far from the edge should the player spawn? This is useful if you maybe have like a fence or something. We can actually probably leave the offset to be something like 0.1. Honestly, the way that I'm doing the math, you should be able to get away with no offset, but a 0.1 should be enough to push you over. And then we're going to need to store the exit direction. But let's create that as an enum. And what this is it's a way for me to kind of create names as the variable states. You can kind of see the list that I'm listing out here. So basically, an enum essentially can be converted to an integer. And so these are the integer equivalents. But as we code this, you'll see the advantage of me using an enumerator. It makes it a little bit easier for me to kind of know what all these correspond to. Which means now I have the exit direction, and this is going to specify what side is the map the player is exiting from. So if they're going to be walking off the west edge of the map, we'll need to set this to west. Okay, and this last, so let's just put a comment here. We need to create a, because when I load the new scene, I'm going to lose all the data in the previous scene. So I need to create a data type that would be able to store this information. Essentially, I need to store this player position plus any sort of modifiers onto a object that's going to keep it. So we're going to begin creating what's called a scriptable object. Scriptable objects are things that can persist between scenes. So I'm going to create a new folder inside of my scripts called scriptable objects. And the first one I'm going to create, C# script, let's call it exit vector value. And it defaults it to a mono behavior, but we're going to change all that in a second. So let's go open up exit vector value. And so let's change it from being a mono behavior to being a scriptable object. And just for the sake of convenience, I'm going to want to inherit iSerialization callback receiver. This actually allows me access to two very important methods. And I just hovered over and told it to fix it. And that is on after deserialize and on before deserialize. So basically, this on deserialize will basically be triggered when play is stopped, or if the new scene does not reference this script. So we're going to actually use that to reset the defaults, essentially. Because one of the issues with this is it actually will keep the data in between loads. So we'll see the problem as we play with it. And now to access my enumerator, I have to say scene transition, which is the name of the script, which is why I saved the script before I exited. So if it doesn't pop up for you, you have to make sure that you've saved your changes here. Scene transition dot exit direction. We're going to call this exit, and then public scene transition dot exit direction default exit. Okay, this thing is mostly complete. Let's put something new here. Create asset menu. Menu name equals, we'll call it like my scriptable objects. forward slash, what's this one called? It's exit vector value. Okay, so we're going to eventually come back and add some stuff in here, but let's see how this interacts and deals with first. So we're going to save this. And now it's going to cause us to recompile here. And I'm going to make a brand new folder for stuff at kind of the root of assets here. I'm going to create a new one. Create new folder. You can actually see my new thing right there. New folder. And I'm going to call this scriptable objects. Inside of the scriptable objects folder, I'm going to create a new my scriptable objects exit vector value. That's the thing that we just made. We'll create it and we'll call it player starting position. And right now we're not going to really mess with most of this, but you can see that I have the enumerator lets me make these little drop down boxes for which type of exit it is, which is actually extremely convenient. And the spawning position is going to be the position the player starts at. So looking at the player here, my player is at about negative 4.5, comma 0. So let's just spawn the player there. So going back to my scriptable object, we'll make its starting position negative 4.5 in the X. And we'll put that in the default too. Okay. Now we can return back to the script. This is done. Let's go for now. Then let's go to scene transition, and we need to, inside of the scene transition, create a variable to track that new thing we made. So it's going to be a public exit vector value player location storage, and that's going to be the way we can access this. So let's put a tooltip. Don't change, because we're going to set it up in the prefab, link to the scriptable object of player position. A lot of variables. Now let's begin adding our first main thing here. So let's start with on trigger enter 2D. And let's start with essentially just the basics. Let's do a point transition, get that to work, and then I'm going to expand it to work on edges. So it will start very humble, but it will get very complex over time. So let's just start it with this. What's that called? Player location storage dot spawning position is equal to. So remember, spawning position is a vector too, and we need to set it to this one right here, the destination position, because the idea is we want to inside of this scene transition store the location where we want the player to end up. And so we're gonna just do that for now. And then let's call scene manager, but that's actually not going to be happy because we need to include up here Unity engine dot scene management, and now scene manager will complete scene manager dot load scene to load, which is that string that we had up here. So we're using the string to load, we're using the player destination position. We're going to be setting both of those, and right now this is kind of super simple for just doing a point transition, and honestly point transitions are very easy. So spell permanent. So the idea is that that's gonna store it, and then we're going to load the new scene. Okay. However, we need to tell the player to jump to that position. So we want the player to actually, on a new scene load, we need the player to set their location during their start to where we're going. So we're going to need for the player to also track that, whatchamacallit, the state thing. Let's just make a new one here called loading new levels. And that's going to be public. We call it an exit vector value. Starting position. And that's going to be attached to this object here. So inside of start is where we're going to use it. Let's just do the most basic of it and set up starting location on scene load. And we're going to set my transform dot position equal to the starting position dot spawning position. So that's going to basically, when I pop into a new level, it's going to set my position to where that script is telling me to appear. So we hit save on the player. And now we've got the kind of core basics of this done. Let's jump back to here. Everything's going to compile for a bit. Player, so let's go to the prefab version of player. The prefab of player needs to link this starting position here to this scriptable object. So we're going to plop that there. We shouldn't need to change that. So once it's a kind of a fire and forget type of thing. Now let's make our transition zones. I'm going to go game object create empty, and we'll call this thing scene transition. Going to reset its transform, and I'm going to try to guide it to that location. If I hold down control, it does snap to grid, so I can get a little bit better control over this. And I gave it one of these icons. The smaller ones don't put the name on there, so I actually do want the name to see scene transition. And I'm going to probably put it here for now. And then let's put a collider on it. Component physics 2D, box collider. I want this to be a trigger because I don't want the player to bump into it. I just want it to sense if the player walks into it. And then let's attach the script that I had just made for the scene transition. Bring it in right there. And scene to load, in this case, it's going to be cave 1. That is the exact spelling of this with spaces. It is a point exit. And we need to link the scriptable object to it. And let's, at this point, I do want to turn this into just a prefab before I specify any of these other things. So I'm going to take that and put that into prefab's core. Scene transition. But we need to figure out where it needs to go. I don't know the X and Y of where I need to go, so I'm going to hit save. I'm going to open up the cave, and I'm going to look to see where do I want the player to appear here. So I kind of want the player to be maybe right about there. So let's go with, and if you're easy to forget things, where did my snipping tool go? Snipping tool. There it is. Maybe just screenshot that so that I remember what those values are. Going back to the overworld, saving this. Scene transition. I want it to dump me off at negative 0.5 and negative 2.75. I'm going to hit save. And now let's go jump into that. We got an error here. Oh, so Cave 1 could not be loaded because it has not been added to the build settings. That's something we're going to have to do every time we make a new scene. So to fix that, we're going to go pull up the build settings from File. And you can see that the only one that it's actually included right now is Overworld. Well, let's go drag and drop all of my other scenes in there as well. So now they'll be referenced. The order does actually matter, because like Unity can actually like tell it to load the next scene. So like if you're doing like Mario or something where scenes would be kind of in the same order every time, you might want to care about the order of these, and you can drag them around too. So don't hit build. That actually exports an executable of this. We can just close this, and now it's included in the build. All right. Oh. My player is somewhere weird. And we'll see why I did that in a second. So we're going to walk through here. And now it put me right here. And I haven't set up the transition back out yet, so I can't go back to that other room. But here's something to keep in mind, that the player starting position, notice that it's actually keeping that start position of what we had before. So when I load my player, if I hit pause, you can see that my player actually snapped to that same position even though I didn't want it to. So these things do actually even keep values in between sessions of the game, which is interesting. It's very interesting that it does that. So that's why we're going to have to play around with this default position. We're going to have to use that on serialize unload. But let's go over to the cave and go set up that one. But I am going to kind of think about where I want the player to appear. I'm going to screenshot that real fast. And to the cave we go. Now conveniently, I've already created a prefab for a scene transition, so I can just drag and drop it in. And I kind of want to keep it in units of 0.5. And then maybe I'll hold down Control and I can slide it back a little bit. One thing to note though is it can actually overlap with my invisible wall here. So if I wanted to put it like right here, it actually has the same collider as the invisible wall, but it will still trigger. And I'll demonstrate that. But we need to set where it wants to go. It wants to go back to the overworld. And the position was X was 14.5, Y was 7.5, but I want to be slightly lower than that. I want to be about maybe 1 unit lower, so let's try minus 0.75. You actually do the math inside the fields and it will do it for you. So that looks good. Notice the prefab's already kept that length. This player, because the player was inheriting from the prefab, kept track of all that. So everything seems convenient. The weirdest thing here is the fact that my scene transition is actually on top of the collider for the invisible wall. But that should be okay. Hit save, go back to the original overworld, hit play. We'll fix that right after that we verify this works. And so now when I go through the cave, I'll jump to the correct position here. And then when I go back out the cave, it takes me to right here. And then I go back through the cave. And so, I mean, we could play with where we want the players to spawn. Like, I think, maybe this is spawning up too far. Like, I'd maybe rather have the player appear right here. So we can go, play with these values. Maybe I'm going to drop this Y to just -2. See what that looks like. But regardless, I'm pretty happy with my point transition. We're going to probably have to do another video for the edge transitions, because that is quite long. Ooh. Oh, I needed it to be lower. So I needed like -4 or something. So if I pause it and just take a look at where the player is right now. Player is at, yeah, -4 would look good. Where all my things are being weird. So we want a y value of -4. But that doesn't solve the problem of the fact that my player is appearing in some weird places at the start. So to fix that, let's go into our the scriptable object code here. We need to play with this on after deserialize. Basically, this executes anytime we stop play or the scene that we went to does not have a copy of this script. So, very easy to fix. We're going to want to say spawning position equals the default spawning position, and we're going to set the exit to be the default exit. And so all of that looks good. I want to make that capital S because that was irritating me. So default spawning position, then all that, so that it's going to reset these when we unload stuff. So we hit save, and because it's attached to the player, every scene that the player is in, it will never deserialize. It'll only deserialize if there's no players on a new scene, which shouldn't be an issue. Now this won't update. Actually, no matter where I place the player, it's not going to matter. So like if I place the player up here, because this starting position is setting the player to, oh, it wiped it out. Now it's 0, 0. Didn't we want like -4 for my default? Yeah, it's like -4, 0, I think. So now when I start, you can see that the player is going to be placed down there. And so that should fix that problem. It could cause a problem for us starting on different scenes for debugging reasons, but not a whole lot we can do about that. So even if I like exit here and I resume, I'm still going to be back to that spot on the path right here. So we've successfully managed to get a point transition to work, going into the cave and out of the cave. So in the next video, we're going to actually get transitions working along the edges of the screen. So that script will become a little bit more complicated, both on the scene transition side and the player transition and the player side. But it will give us the ability to load all of our maps quite easily. So thank you for watching, and we'll check out the last video.